Hello, Conrad. Thank you so much for joining me today. How are you?
Great. How you doing?
I'm good. All right. Well, let's go ahead and dive right in. Tell me about your company, super big company, Merck.
Sure. I work for Merck, one of the top three largest pharmaceutical companies in the world. I have the privilege of leading the diabetes franchise here in the U.S. We're focused on a couple of key areas, so oncology, vaccines, of course, chronic care. We also have an animal health business as well.
Sweet. And what is the specific problem that you solve for the people that you serve?
Sure. For the people that we serve, our motto is really inventing for life. And so our challenge really is bringing to the market innovative products and solutions to really help people live better, healthier, and fuller lives.
All right. So let's switch gears a little bit and dive more into your experiences as a leader for a lot of really high performing teams. So that's one of the things that you're really known for and why you've done so well throughout your career. So from your point of view, what are the required elements to build a team that operates at a high level?
Sure. So I think one of the first things you have to do is you have to clearly articulate that that's the expectation. I think a lot of people just assume like if anybody's on the team, they're just going to perform at a higher level, and that's not necessarily the case. So you really have to have a vision that says that you aspire to be a high performing team. I think you have to communicate that vision, and then you have to make sure that all the people that support your team understand that vision as well, because you're going to have to bring everybody along and to really create this high performing culture. So I think some of those elements are really about, setting that vision, but then you also have to model that behavior, and you have to really be willing to kind of teach folks what is required, and then you have to assess and make those course corrections wherever needed until you kind of feel like you're on that road to becoming a high performing team.
Got it. Now, do you set that vision immediately whenever you join a team, or is that something that you kind of observe for a little while, what's been happening, and then you make adjustments as you're going along or as you've been there for a little while?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, what I like to do when I first come in is I try to meet with every single person on the team as quickly as possible. And I really ask them that, what do they define as success? What are their hopes? What are their dreams? What do they think if they look ahead 5 years from now? Where do they want to be? Where do they want the team to be? And how would we have gotten there? And then I use that to really collect all the different thoughts to then, mix that with my own perspective and put it together so that they feel like this is really my words are just the culmination of all the insights that I've gathered from them in terms of who they want to be. And then I just try to weave it together in an effective story, which I think is what's really important for highly effective teams and high performing teams. You've got to have the narrative around why. Why am I doing this? Why do I want to be a high performing team? What's at the end of that rainbow? And I think once you can articulate that story, it's a lot easier to get people to buy into it.
For sure. Now, a lot of leaders feel like, oh, I can build a high performing team as long as they get to build their team from scratch, right? They get to handpick everybody that they want to have and build this sort of rock star crew. But a lot of people really just don't have this luxury. So, what are your thoughts on how people can go about building this type of culture that they feel that they desire, even whenever they are starting with a team that they inherit?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and sometimes, depending on the level in the organization, you may get an opportunity to bring in some people, but oftentimes you don't. And so one of the things that I try to do is I tell the team we're all starting from scratch,
Okay.
right? So you kind of reset the race, and I think by doing that, what you're able to do is even if you had someone that may have been a high performer, their level of high performance may have been based on somebody else's definition of high performance.
Okay.
And so that's why I decided to start over and say, hey, this is what we've decided is our definition of high performance.
Mhm.
And this is how we're going to get there together. And therefore, if you can't change out the members of the team, you're able to kind of see, okay, so now that I've reset, I've got everybody to buy in. If you see somebody lagging behind, you can kind of have those interventions to kind of see what's required to bring them up to speed. And if they're not eventually getting there, and you're kind of running out of time, I like to tell people, I like to kind of say, hey, look, this is where I hope to be at a certain point in time. If they're not tracking along, then it really comes down to having that conversation to see, is it a matter of, is it a commitment? Is it a talent perspective,
Hmm.
or is it a desire? And if that's not there, then you try to help them find another path that matches where their commitment, desire, and talent is.
For sure. You bring up a really good point because even whenever you set that vision, everyone doesn't always get fully on board with that vision. So, have
Yep.
you often found resistance to people whenever you show up and say, hey, this is our new standard of operating? Even whenever you give them that clear why and the story
Mm.
behind why you're saying we want to perform at this level, do you often find resistance? And if you do, what do you do to get them on board, or is it really a matter of just kind of managing them out?
Sure. So that's a really good question, and it's tough to really know when you should take which course of action. But for me, I have faced resistance when I've come into those roles, and I try to get to the root of the resistance. And what I have found sometimes, that you were really taking people out of their comfort zone, right? And so a lot of the things what I do when I'm building a high performing team, I try to get a good understanding of people's strengths. I kind of get an opportunities, and then I reshuffle the roles on the team. And I find the reshuffling of the roles breaks up that resistance, because what some of that resistance is based on the fact that they were really good at the thing that they were doing.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't want you to change and move them out of that role. And so if you kind of put them into a new role, they can't say, well, I don't have to listen because I already know everything. They're where everybody else is, starting from ground zero. And they realize that they now need to depend on other people to get ahead. And they really need that leadership to provide that direction and that support. So that's one of the ways that I've worked to kind of overcome resistance. Unfortunately, I've only had maybe one or two situations where someone needed to be, I wouldn't say removed from the team, but coached towards another part of the organization that better aligned with their skill set.
Got it. Got it. All right. Now, some leaders think that organizational culture, team culture, company culture is a little woo woo. And they don't really see what the relevance is or the link is between that and having a strong, positive culture, welcoming, happy culture, and the link between
Yeah.
organizational results. What are your thoughts on what the link is, and have you observed anything specifically that kind of supports it?
Yeah. So you know what? I've really evolved as it relates to culture, and it's something that I'm still wrestling with, because there was a point in time where we really would, when hiring people, we'd say, well, is this person a good fit? And as the more I start to understand diversity and the value of diversity, it's like, should we really be hiring people to see if they can fit into our box? Right,
That's a good point.
right, so it's like, wait, fit, like that's not probably how we should be thinking about that. So for me, there are so many subcultures in an organization. It's even weird now when a company tries to describe their culture to me,
Okay.
because that might be the culture of the first floor in the summer, and you may have the culture of the fourth floor in the winter. I mean, it could be that drastic, just the level of what floor you're on it within a building. So for me, what I try to do is the culture is really around that vision,
Okay.
and it's more about, how do these different pieces, these people with their differences, help us accomplish that vision? And I really try to spell it out for people
Okay.
and get people to articulate and actually feel comfortable with it, because once again, I think people can buy into it if they know their own strengths and they know their opportunities and they know how we can work together to help us accomplish this larger goal. So for me, I don't really rely a lot on the company culture.
Mm-hmm.
I talk about this culture of excellence. I think about this culture of epicness, right? And that starts to shape how people are thinking about it. And once again, we not only do that on the team, but we try to engage all people that work with the team. And we do that by weaving that narrative and getting people into that space of thinking differently, and which hopefully maybe we'll talk about a little bit later on. But my new kind of epiphany is about this idea of mental models.
Got
And
it.
a high performance team is really a new mental model. And that's when you can really start to unleash their potential.
Oh, I'm excited about this mental model thing. I want to dive into that, but first, I just want to go back to something you said about whenever you're bringing somebody in the team, like, is it a right cultural fit? Like, are you trying to get them to conform? How
Yeah.
do you work to make sure that you're as you're bringing on new team members, as you're diversifying your team, that people really live into their
Hmm.
diversity as a strength
Hmm.
versus trying to fit into what seems like the norm, or
Yeah.
the standard way of operating within an
Yeah.
organization. Because I think
Sure.
sometimes people feel like that's what they have to do.
Yeah. And so some may say this is not a good approach, but I create an us versus the world philosophy,
Okay.
right? It's kind of that thing where you kind of like they don't want us to succeed, they don't think that we're great enough, they don't think we can hit our numbers, but we're going to show them. And so what it happens is it gets you to stop thinking about being accepted by everybody else and just saying I'm accepted by my team because
Okay.
we have a shared vision and we're in this together.
Okay.
And that's how I've been able to kind of get people concerned about, you know, am I going to fit in here or there? And I think as a leader, you have a responsibility to make sure that your team feels safe.
Okay.
And that's what I find is really important, to really be able to embrace diversity in any manner, right? On race, gender, ethnicity, sexuality.
Mm-hmm.
You have to create a safe culture. And that's what's important for people to really be able to bring those diverse experiences and their diverse self to the table. The other thing that I do, which I think is important, is I try to look at the work that we're doing and I make sure that everybody's project intersects with somebody in another way.
Okay.
And sometimes it helps to accelerate things and sometimes it helps to slow things down. But what it makes sure is that you can't leave anybody behind.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a really important piece of if you're going to build this culture of excellence and a high performing team, you can't set up the projects where one person is going to be able to run forward and somebody else's project is going to drag behind,
Right.
because then they're going to feel like, well, that person is getting all the attention or I'm getting missed out. And it starts to create dissension within the team.
Got it. You said so many wonderful things there. But I'm super curious. How do you create a culture and a team environment where everybody feels safe? Because I
Yeah.
feel like if I'm hearing you correctly, and part of through your us against the world philosophy,
Hmm.
it's the team, to be a high performing team, the team has to operate like a family.
Yes.
And they have to have that degree of closeness and level of intimacy that where they're super tight and interwoven in how they operate. So how do you create that to
Hmm.
where it's not like a competition or everybody's trying to get your attention so they can get the
Yeah.
performance review rating? Like, how do you
Yeah.
create that sense of camaraderie
Hmm.
so where we're all really working together?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think the first piece of it is transparency.
Okay.
And that really starts with self. So I start out of setting the culture by letting the team know this is the kind of feedback I'm getting. These are the things that I'm struggling with. These are the questions that I don't know the answer to. Right. So it's not one of these things where the boss is going to come across as if he or she knows all the answers, if they don't have any weaknesses, if they don't have any vulnerabilities. Right. So I think when you're willing to be vulnerable, I think that says, oh, I think it's okay, that it's safe for me to talk about my vulnerabilities.
Okay.
The other thing that I try to do is when I have feedback for a person, I do it as a team.
Okay.
And
Wow, that's different.
I say, hey, we just came out of that session. I had some feedback for Jen. Jen, are you okay with me sharing that feedback for you in this setting? Right? And then when she's like, okay, then we can talk about that feedback and the other team can hear it and they can say, well, Jen, actually, that's good because I think I do that too, or I didn't know that I do that, or when in that setting, this is what I do, right? So when we get to a place where we're sharing feedback publicly, I think and everybody gets it the same. I think then people say, oh, this is a safe space. And here's the last piece, which is the most important, which people might say, you got to be crazy, right? Which is I try to talk about what's happening in the world with my team,
Okay.
and we carve out time to talk about that. And I think, there was times where you didn't talk about religion, you didn't talk about politics, you didn't talk about some of these other issues that were taboo. On my team, there's a gentleman who belongs to the Latter Day Saints Church, and they had built a a new facility here in Philadelphia, and they had like a special like window where you could actually invite people into the church, which normally you can't go into if you're not a member.
Hmm.
The bonding that we did as a team, for him to be able to expose us to his religion and his beliefs and share that with us really strengthened the bond on the team. I have another woman on my team who's from Nigeria,
Hmm.
and to be able to share with us what are some of their practices in terms of religion, or when it comes, she just recently got married, and what their religious ceremony was going to be like, was great. So that's one of those things where we discuss, events, we talk about our families, we talk about our aspirations, we spend time together, and you that creates that family unit that says these are people that I trust and it's a safe space. And you have to make as much time to talk about those things and to get that time together as much as you do talking about the business if you really want to create that high performing culture.
Very good, very good. Well, thank you for sharing your secret
No
sauce
problem.
with us. I think, like you said, I think a lot of people are probably like, what? But I think I can clearly see how that definitely helps with the bonding and takes your team to a whole different level of the way you connect with each other as a result of moving beyond just the work day and
Yep,
getting more involved in each other's lives and understanding a little bit more of who they are and why they do what they do.
absolutely.
For sure. All right. Now, you talked about mental models. So tell me about that and how that works and what your philosophy is.
Sure. So the mental models for me are kind of like a palate cleanse,
Okay.
right? And so I'll give you an example. So, I'm working on it. I just inherited a team that was a fully formed team, been together for a while, and on a pretty successful product. And so here you are, you coming in as a new leader, and like you can't come in and tell them that their baby's ugly, right? So it's like but you were brought in to bring about a certain level of change.
Hmm.
And to shake things up, and not because they were doing anything wrong, but it's just the environment that we operate in. It's just changing so rapidly, right? The digital transformation, consumers are way more demanding. The competitive environment is just, it's crazy. And so what I did, from a mental model perspective, was I came in and I had, during our kind of annual planning process, I gave them the objective of hacking our brand. And they're like, what does that mean? And I was like, you no longer work for Merck. You work for a competitive company, whatever the name is. And your job is to tear our product apart. Now, think about what that does to your mental model, where all you've ever done is build and build and build and build. You've never really turned on yourself and say, have I really thought about where I'm vulnerable?
Hmm.
And so when I actually, had the team work on that exercise to say, it's okay, it gave the team and people who supported the team the opportunity to point out things where the normal typical corporate culture wouldn't have allowed for that, right?
Hmm.
Because I have to provide feedback on this person. So if I knew that they were the person that said that my idea is bad, how am I going to how am I going to treat them when it comes time for year in reviews?
Hmm.
So what this did was that it removed that kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? It kind of removed that like barrier where I can't say anything. And here's a key word: made it safe,
Hmm.
right, to actually speak truth to what the situation is. And what we found was the best ideas came from the team themselves.
Super
So that's
cool.
just an example of one way of changing a mental model. But there's so many different ones. Just a quick example. I mean, sometimes it's traveling, right? I know you're a world traveler, and think about how you come back and view the world when
Completely
you've
different.
traveled somewhere else.
Yeah.
I gave a talk recently, and I gave them the example of my 18-month-old daughter likes to turn herself around and get dizzy. And when she does that, she laughs like it's nobody's business. And I was like, why is that so funny to children, making themselves dizzy? But guess what happens? When you turn around like that and you make yourself dizzy, your whole perspective on the world changes. And as it settles down, you may see something completely different that you hadn't seen before. So that's really, for me, I think the secret sauce is finding those different examples, whether it's traveling, whether it's destroying the brand, whether it's putting constraints on how you typically think about it, that creates opportunities for you to see things differently and really accelerate that performance mindset.
Very good. Very good. Can everyone perform at a high level?
That is a really good question. Um, so here's my answer. Yes,
Okay.
they can at the thing that they are good at.
Okay.
And that's the challenge that I think a lot of people run into when they're um, building a team. It's important to pull the pieces together where you've got skills that are complementary to each other, right? But when you try to force someone to be good at everything, I don't think they can do that.
Mm-hmm.
So as a leader, you have to know your own strengths and weaknesses or opportunities, and you've got to pull the pieces together of a team, a high performing team, and say, how do I complement each other?
Right.
Because I think where I've struggled in the past as a leader was trying to make everybody operate at the same level because we're a high performing team instead of realizing it's those differences that actually make us a high performing team and not the similarities.
Right. Now, so you mentioned earlier that in the process of building your team and elevating what you guys are capable of doing, you
Hmm.
often have to do a lot of training.
Yep.
But sometimes people, whenever you're in a professional setting, and you've got people who are already at a very senior level and progressed significantly in their career, sometimes
Hmm.
people just assume that you know what you're doing, you're smart, you'll figure it
Yep.
out, and training kind
Yep.
of falls by the wayside, or it's something that they have to do on their own. So,
Yep.
what do you do to make training a priority so that you're constantly able to elevate the skill level of both you and your team?
Sure. So, a couple of things that I do. Number one, I subscribe to a lot of different news leaders. Or sorry, newsletters. I'm an avid reader of Inc. A lot of good content comes out of
Mm-hmm.
there. And so my team knows that 2 to 3 times a week, they'll just get a cool article from me with a snapshot or a summary of this is what I think is cool about it. And I just put it out there. The best part is to get people, especially more seasoned people, to get them to learn is to ask them to teach.
Okay.
That's my secret.
Okay.
So for the people like, well, I already know, it's like, fine. Next time, the next meeting, I want you to come in and teach the rest of the team.
Okay.
And so they're like, well, now I'm on the spot. I don't want to be caught off guard. Let me go do some research.
Okay.
Let me go learn a little bit more about this topic to be able to make sure that if I'm going to teach people and at my team or in front of my boss, that I'm going to actually do a good job.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing that I've uncovered is that for people who are resistant to learning, is to put them to teach, is to actually assign them a role of teaching. But I think you still have to expose them to different opportunities. And I'm always looking for opportunities when we talk about the development plan
Mm-hmm.
where I want them to go to at least 2 external trainings. And one of the things that I do is I also attend it with them so that they see that, once again, I'm still saying, even though I'm the leader, there's so much that I can still learn. And that's why I show up.
Got it. What's the difference between a team that plays to win versus a
Hmm.
team that plays to not lose?
Ooh, man, you're getting deep here. So I think that's such an important philosophy that you have to play to win.
Mm-hmm.
I think the difference is that a team that's playing not to lose doesn't take risk.
Okay.
They don't experiment. They want to place the safe bet. They're going to research everything to death. They're going to double, triple, quadruple check. They're going to make sure you've got alignment across every single person imaginable. And I think, like, just like the stock market, right? Yes, when there's more risk, potentially there's more reward. When there's less risk, the reward is not as great. But I think what I try to do is, if you're going to build a high performing team, is to understand that even when you lose, you win
Mm-hmm.
because you learn,
Right.
right? Which gets back to our previous conversation around to how do you get people to learn. So there's the kind of learning by, showing them examples of other people. There's the learning by having them teach, but then there's the learning by having them do. And sometimes I set them up intentionally to fail. Don't tell anybody I say that.
Okay.
But when I do that, I said, so what'd you learn about? It's like, well, if we did it the next time, then I would do it this way. And that's the key word. They said, when we do it the next time.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And that's what I'm trying to get them to, this idea of, like, you did it. Nothing happened terribly. We didn't,
Right.
we weren't successful. But now you're thinking about the iteration. You're thinking about the next time. And that's what high performing teams do. They adapt and they adjust and they go back at it.
They don't run away from failure. Right.
No, not at all.
All right. So there's something there's a lot of buzzwords that go around in terms of what people want to accomplish. They say things like, I want to be a market leader, I want to be a
Yeah.
digital leader, I want to be this. And it's
Hmm.
great to have those aspirations, and it's another thing to actually do it. So
Yeah.
what would you say that living into being a market leader actually looks like in day-to-day practice?
Got you. So I don't I don't like the terminology I want to be a market leader
Okay.
because I feel like if you're doing anything just for you,
Mm-hmm.
right? How much you're going to get out of it. And I give you an example, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you finish cleaning your house, how do you feel? You're like, "Oh, house is clean." Okay.
Okay.
If you volunteered for Habitat for Humanity or you volunteered for and you help somebody else, then how do you feel after that one?
You feel great.
You feel great.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when I say that I want to be the market leader, it's like, okay. But when I say that I want to deliver the best customer experience,
Mm-hmm.
right? Then you know that you're delighting somebody else.
Right. Right.
And that's a much different feeling and energy that's sustainable because that's what's required to be a high performing team. You have to be able to fight through the failures and get back up. And so I feel like when you feel like I want to be a market leader and you don't kind of accomplish that, then you start pointing fingers, you blame everybody else, and you kind of get demotivated. Versus if you said, I want to create the best customer experience, if you actually create the best customer experience, a byproduct of that is you're going to become the market leader.
Right. Right. Well, I think it's a key difference between being internally focused and externally focused. And you
Exactly.
perform at a different level when you're doing something for somebody that you, like you said, the example
Yeah.
you gave about Habitat for Humanities. It changes the way you operate because
Yeah.
it's easier to let yourself down than it is to let other people down.
Absolutely.
For sure.
Absolutely.
For sure. All right. Well, this has been fantastic. We could talk for hours about all this stuff. Any parting words of wisdom that you
Yeah.
have for executives, for leaders, for business owners who want to win more customers by building a high performing team?
Got you. When I talk about my team, I talk to them about products versus brands.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I equate for them that a product is an employee and a brand is talent,
Okay.
right? A team is a product, a high performing team is a brand,
Okay.
okay? And a brand is a relationship that you have with someone, and a brand elicits an emotion. And I said, people may forget what we say and they may forget what we do, but they'll never forget how we made them feel. And to me, when we have a vision that's aspirational at the highest level, that emotional connection,
Mm-hmm.
that's where you have to start as a leader. So before you start figuring out the metrics, the data, the analytics, all of that stuff's going to be there. The first thing you have to do is you have to understand where your team is, what motivates them, what inspires them, and what is that externally focused goal, mission, vision that you can get them to hold on to that can start to really generate some emotions in them that they can pour that out. And then you let them know that the measure of success is going to be how do people feel, right? Not what we've accomplished. How do people feel? That's your role as a leader, and you have to be the person to be the architect, and you've got to be the storyteller. You've got to be the ambassador. You've got to be the first one through the door. You've got to be the last one out of there. But your job is to keep everybody together because the organizational culture will be trying to work their way in there, and you have to create that us against the world mentality.
Mm-hmm.
And what you keep doing, you just keep pulling people in everywhere you go and rally them around this idea. And so, for any new leader, existing leader, new company, old company, high performing team, low performing team, you've got to really set that vision. And because without the vision, there's nothing.
Very good. Conrod Kelly, thank you so much for stopping
No
by
problem.
and sharing your wisdom with us. This
Thank you
has
for
been a
having
lot of fun.